Hi. I've had a lovely response from very many of you saying that you really enjoyed the first video diary and that you'd like to meet again. So here I am meeting you again. And this time I thought we'd talk about books that we're reading while we're locked down or socially isolated. And you sent me a number of really wonderful books and I've replied to you with some notes. But also I've dug out a list. Everybody, journalists all the time, ask you what are you reading, what are your favourite books. So I've dug out a list, a fantastic list, quite a lot of them. And I'd be really happy. I thought what I'd do is I'd go through some of them. Some of them you will know. Some of them are great classics. Some of them you might even have in your house already. Hope you do. And some of them you might be able to buy them online and get them delivered. There are bookshops. Obviously the bookshops, live high street bookshops have closed, but a lot of them will be doing deliveries, and I imagine individual independent bookshops, the ones you usually go to, they'll probably be doing deliveries too. So it's really worth putting a call in or checking on a website. And certainly the big book suppliers are doing taking online orders for hard copy books and delivering them. And of course there's always the option of changing to digital, so you're ordering a book online that's delivered to your Kindle or your iPad or a similar reader, a Kobo reader, or actually audio, which of course you could get. Anyway, my favourite books, a recent list I made, Elizabeth Goudge, The Little White Horse. It's really a children's book, but it's so delightful and it's so charming and it's such a fantasy world that it's a bit of a pleasure to go to in these troubled times. A book by an author that I love who is very little known in England, an American author called Joan Greenberg. She wrote the really famous book, I Never Promised You a Rose Garden, under a different name. And her other books, Joanne Greenberg, are, I think, wonderful. She's a great writer. The one I love the best is called Simple Gifts. Anne Roe, W-R-O-E, wrote a book called A Story of Deception, which is the story of Perkin Warbeck. She does one of the best understandings of the fate of The Little Princess in the Tower, which is of so much interest to so many people. And she writes it as a really interesting amalgam between a history book and a novel. So in terms of style, it's fascinating. It's really beautifully written. I recommend it very highly. Henry James, oh, you have to read Henry James. He's very long and he's very leisured in his writing, so he's perfect for an enforced reading break. I love so many of his books. The one I've listed here is Portrait of a Lady. It's just a beautiful book about deception and understanding and a woman growing into her power the hardest way. I mean, it's just a great book. George Eliot, Middlemarch, again, nice big book. You'll be tucked up with it for some time, but such a great book, a real state of England book. It takes in a small town in the middle of the country, the aristocracy in it, the working people in it, the actual labourers in it, and every strand of story is enmeshed with other people's stories. I love the heroine, Dorothea. You can't help but love her. But there's some wonderful characters who aren't important, though everybody's important to the story because it's so entwined. But they're beautifully drawn. If you can't face a great big book like Middlemarch, try Mill on the Floss from George Eliot. Mill on the Floss from George Eliot. It's a really much smaller version of Middlemarch in that it's about a county town and about the rise and fall of people's wealth in it and people's ambitions. But it's she's such a great writer. It's beautifully written. Oh, I'm not going to tell you the last one on the list. This is an old list which I wrote some time ago. It's too sad. We don't need sad books. I don't need sad books. I'm not going to recommend a sad book at this time. This one is heart-wrenching. There's no need for tears. We can't afford them. Other cheerful lists, Howard's End by Ian Forster. Oh, Ian Forster. The film's fantastic. Howard's End. It's a really beautiful film, but always I think if you're a reader, you want the book. You could read with the clearest of conscience anything by Ian Forster in any circumstances. It's always going to be the right book for the place and the time, because it's either going to take you right away from where you don't want to be, or it's going to enhance the pleasure of being where you are. Ian Forster, this one I register Howard's End, but really Where Angels Fear to Tread I would think would be a good pandemic novel. It's so beautifully cheerful without being banal. It's the rise of the human spirit in unlikely circumstances in so many of the characters. I've just read the Forsyte Saga by John Galsworthy, and I read that because I was writing my own saga and I thought it would be a good idea to see how a great master of the novel does it. And it was completely absorbing. Again, it's a nice big book, but because it comes in several volumes, you can take it one at a time, and if you want a break you can go away and come back to it. I'd recommend it. I mean, it's a very typical Victorian novel, so it is rather sprawling and it is rather dense, but incredibly readable, I think, once you get into it. And Orlando by Virginia Woolf. That's a good pandemic novel. If you haven't read Orlando, then this will be a good time to do it. It's not that it's highly attractive to the light reader, because none of Woolf, I think, is easy to read, but there's a joy in this and a vibrancy in it. She wrote it when she was in love with another woman as a tribute to the other woman, and there's a sort of happiness of young love in it, and it's in a sense timeless. I won't say it's a historical novel because the character goes through time and appears at different stages of English history, and so it's got that lovely sense of being historical but just taking the best bits. I mean, I'd never do it, but Virginia Woolf had the courage and the knowledge to do it. So she really captures, there's the most beautiful scene of the Frost Fair, the Elizabethan Frost Fair on the Thames, which I've read for the first time decades ago, and I can still remember how vivid and lovely it was. So that's the list for today. I'll do another video later on in a few days' time. Get reading, and if you would like, we could all look at one book in some detail together, like a reading club, but for people who've read it or people who want to start it. And if we were to do that, and you wanted to do that, then I'd like to look at The Golden Bowl by Henry James. So we could do that if you like, or I can come back on and talk to you about books for troubled times. These are troubled times. I hope you stay well. Remember about isolating yourself. Remember about being responsible, not just for yourself, but for the National Health Service staff who have to go out there, and the other people who are working so hard to try and keep everything going while all of us get well. Good luck. See you later.